Hello, and welcome to the third in our series on meeting the challenges of technology. Um, Today we will be dealing with basic foundations that we need to be dealing with in order to ensure our basic safety. Hello, and welcome to the third in our series on meeting. We will be addressing the basics that we need to be dealing with to ensure our safety. The focus here is, our spiritual, but the reality is that the two things really overlap in a very, very strong, in a very significant manner. So this is where we are starting. I am going to wait another 2 minutes to allow people to join, and then we will get moving. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. You can enter something into the chat, or you can ask a question. Please unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, but please also do try to wait to the end. There is some time scheduled in for questions and answers at the end of the session. Okay. Okay, so to get started with the things that are at the foundation of navigating technology, we need to start with not actually thinking about technology per se, but the foundations and fundamentals of how we approach life in general. And obviously, we could spend forever on that, but there are a few issues that I want to highlight that are specifically and extremely important in dealing with modern technologies. As I've mentioned in the other two sessions, when I speak about technology, I am not talking about technology in general, because again, that is unlimited, but I am focusing on technologies that deal with information and communications, primarily the intersection of both, and how all that plays out. Okay, the first thing that I need to address is something that we all think about, but that is often not explicitly spoken about. And certainly, I would say, often not spoken about enough. And that is it's at the foundation of making sure that we do the right thing, we think in the right way. We need to remember the Eibishter is there, okay, no matter what we're doing. And there's no carve out for technology. Now, this is not a new idea. Shulchan Aruch advises, for instance, that we start each day reminding ourselves, Shivisi Hashem L'nei Samin. I remember a number of years ago, Rabbi Yisrael Reisman of the Agudah Shul did a series on the internet and the Jewish home, and he talked about this also. He suggested, for instance, that people have a little sign by their computer that says, Einag Novada, I believe it was Einag Novada, Shivisi Hashem L'nei Samin. Again, it's the concept of, when dealing with technology, let us remember that the Eibishter is around. So that obviously we need to bring that into our lives in general. And the reason it is especially important when dealing with technology is because technology gives us a lot of capabilities. It gives us a lot of genuine freedom, but it also gives us an illusion of freedom, an illusion that we can do things that nobody will know about, or that it doesn't really matter, or we can keep it secret, and That's not the case. Hashem is there. Hashem sees what we are doing, no matter where we are, and that includes in dealing with technology. And it's really important to inculcate this idea, this very, very strong idea that it doesn't matter where you are physically or whether you're in so-called virtual reality, etc. The Eibishter is there. He sees, he hears, etc. I don't know. My cohort, okay, when I was a kid, there were the records of Uncle Yossi Goldstein, and I remember one of the stories was about a wagon driver who was driving a chashuv, I don't remember who, and he stopped in the middle of the road at some point, and he wanted to go into the field and take some fruit that didn't belong to him. And he asked the Rav to keep an eye out and see if somebody sees him stealing. And the guy goes into the field, and suddenly the Rav starts yelling, he's watching. And I obviously do not tell the story anywhere near as well as Uncle Yossi. But in any case, the point of the story is that even in the middle of an empty field, in other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was watching. That is a message we need to internalize and teach our kids when it comes to technology. You're on the internet using a pseudonym. You're on a smartphone that nobody knows that you bought, et cetera, et cetera. None of these things matter. Maybe your parents don't know, maybe your school doesn't know, maybe your work doesn't know, maybe yes, maybe not. But the reality is that we may not know, people around you may not know that you're doing this, that, or the other thing. The Eibishter knows. The Eibishter knows, and the illusion that nobody knows is just that. It is an illusion, and that is something that is extremely important. And that's the first level, okay? Because that's our touchstone. That's our touchstone. That's at the core. So that's a really fundamental thing. Going from there are certain core, I don't know what word to use, I would say almost characteristics of a person that are really, really important and very key in, again, how we approach technology. So one really important thing is ehrlichkeit. And, at first blush, that doesn't seem obvious. We worry about things like tznius, et cetera, et cetera. But ehrlichkeit is an extremely, extremely important thing. And it plays out in a number of ways. One is actually fairly direct. Many, many things that get you in trouble, I'm talking about more in terms of, say, being scammed, being, dragged into problematic areas, only work or primarily depend on people not being ehrlich, really. Like, for instance, there's a whole genre of scam emails called the 409 scams. And the history of how it got that name isn't really important, but basically what these emails are, where you get an email from somebody who claims to have access to a huge amount of money, which they kind of have access to, but they don't really have access to, and they need your bank account number in order to be able to get full access to that money. And because and in thanks for you being so generous to give them your bank account information, they will leave you with 10 or 20% of this huge amount of money. And generally speaking, they're talking, they bait the hook with huge amounts of money. So they'll say things like, there's $200 million in this account, and I will give you 20%. Now, 20% of $200 million is a lot of money, right? So it's very, very tempting. What is almost universal with these scams is that the hook here is that there's a lot of money that isn't kosher. The money was gotten in all sorts of ill-gotten ways, and they basically hope to grab somebody who's so greedy, not necessarily even a very greedy person, because remember, we're talking about huge amounts of money, but they're hoping that your greed will overweigh your sense of yosher, for one thing, but also your sense of, does this make sense? How is this going to work? Why is my bank account information going to help them? What's to keep them, how do I know these people are telling the truth, right? All of these things are really good questions, but they're hoping that the greed, they dangle this, amount of money in front of you will kind of throw you off. And the person whose first reaction is fair, this is muktzamach mismias, because this is stolen money. This is money that was gotten through murder. This was through gezel, through bribery, whatever. And by the way, always these things always have and literally they'll say things like, just typical, most of them in my case go into spam these days, but I used to get a lot of them, and now they're in spam. Occasionally I give a look at them to see what's out there. So it'll be something like, I am Madame Chick, whatever is, and I am the widow of General Hutzenplutz, who, while he was the minister of oil in this little versteckte African country, and he skimmed $200 million off the oil revenues. And then there was a coup, and he was killed in the coup, and now they don't want to let me have the money. And the only way I can get it out is to work with somebody in the United States. And if you give me all of your bank account information, I will let you keep 20% of the money. That is obviously they don't say versteck the country. They give a name of a province, of a country, or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But that is what they are basically. That is basically what they're dangling in front of you. So, this is money that, according to the letter writer, to the email writer, is saying, this is money that my late husband stole when he was the minister, and then he was, whatever. So this is not yeshidik. So there are two reasons they do this. One is that they hope that the whole story is so out of the ordinary. So they're hoping to hook you with the greed and make you not ask too many questions, but also to throw you off by that the story is so strange altogether that the practical questions won't come up. But also what they hope is that when you do start getting into trouble, you kind of don't really have any options, because what are you going to do? You're going to go to the police and say, I agreed to help somebody steal $200 million from their country, right? Who's going to help you? The police aren't going to help you. The FBI isn't going to help you. That's the thinking, and that's really what they do, because what they're really going to do, they're not putting $200 million into your account and then taking 160 million out and leaving you 20 million, 40 million. No, what they're doing with that information is emptying your bank account to the last dollar. Okay. But again, if your first reaction here is to recognize that you are dealing with people who fundamentally cannot be trusted, that this is muktzamach mismias because it is theft, it is gezel, then it really just helps keep you from falling into a trap. And again, the 409 scams are not the only one, but this is just a classic example. The other piece of it is also something else, though. You hear all these stories about this kid who got involved, with a smartphone, or snuck behind their parents' back and got involved online, and this, that, and the other. Or you hear stories about people who at work start, getting involved in online stuff that they shouldn't be, etc. And there is a very interesting piece here that tends to get overlooked, but is really, really crucial. Nine times out of 10, I would say 99 times out of 100, the first step in getting in trouble required a decision that was not erlich. Okay, like the person who's at work and has been told that they're not supposed to use their computer for personal stuff, or the person who spends, it's okay if I spend a half an hour doing my personal stuff, going to this, that, or the other site, even though I'm supposed to be on the clock, etc., etc. The Ehrlichkeit piece keeps you from getting in trouble. And this is, again, not a new idea. It goes back to the Gemara, right? Most of you probably know the story of Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish saw Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, as is known, was extremely handsome. He was just, not minastam. He was extremely handsome, and he was on the bank of a river, and Reish Lakish was a bandit leader, and he was not just a two bit. He was a major big deal. And he sees Rabbi Yochanan, and he calls out to him, it's a shame, your beauty should be for the women. And Rabbi Yochanan, instead of getting offended, says, and your strength should be for Torah. And that was the beginning of a back and forth of conversation. And Rabbi Yochanan convinces Reish Lakish that he should really truly change his ways. But Reish Lakish says, I can't do it. I can't change everything at once. That's too much. You're asking me to change who I am. I can't do that all at once. Give me one thing that I can start with, and we'll take it from there. And Rabbi Yochanan tells him, you need to stop lying. You cannot tell a lie. Take upon yourself never to tell a lie again. And Reish Lakish took it upon himself never to tell a lie. And guess what? It forced him, the inability to tell a lie meant that he couldn't do 99% of the things that he was used to doing. Because in order to do that, he had to lie to his own people. He had to lie to the people outside of his group. There are different levels of lies. His whole way of life was built on lies. When he had to stop lying, he could not do any of the other things. He couldn't do a raiding, and he couldn't go raid. He couldn't kill somebody. He couldn't punish somebody. He couldn't do a lot of the things that were part and parcel of his lifestyle because he couldn't tell a lie. So that was what enabled him to walk away from his banditry, and as we all, the rest, as I say, is history. But the concept here is that so many of the things that we do, other things that we do wrong, are supported and are enabled by a lack of honesty, a lack of ehrlichkeit. Okay, whether it's a kid who sneaks into their parents' bedroom and grabs their mother's or father's, their parents' smartphone, right? Now, we can talk about why does a parent have a smartphone that isn't locked? That's a separate conversation, which we will have. But the fact is, where does a kid get the idea that it's okay to sneak into their parents' bedroom when their parent isn't around and take their parent's smartphone and use it without permission, right? Or where does a child who knows, is in yeshiva or in school and knows that they're not supposed to have an unfiltered smartphone, where does that child take it upon themselves to get an unfiltered smartphone? I was recently, this was about a year and a half ago. No, it was just before COVID. I was in an electronics store. I was looking, if I recall correctly, for I think it was a case, whatever it was. I was there, and in walks a high school student, and she's looking for a phone, for a very cheap smartphone, because she wants to have the smartphone to hand to the school, because the school has a rule that you come in, you tell the school what phone you have, and you give them your phone during the day, and then at the end of the day they give it back. So she wants to specifically buy a smartphone to hand to the school because she does not want to follow the school's rules about smartphones. So think about this. The problem, there are many problems here, but the thing that is going to enable her to fly in the face of both her parents and school is this lie that she is planning very carefully on how to execute. If to her lying, honesty were something that were core to who she thought about of herself, she could never do that. First of all, she probably wouldn't think of it, but even if somebody gave her that idea, she would not be comfortable with it. She wouldn't be able to do it, and she wouldn't have the confidence to think that she could carry this off. And instead, we're talking about a girl who's willing to spend a fair amount of money, because even a cheap smartphone, you get the junkiest phone, it's still a few dollars. And then it has to be a functioning phone, which means, again, you need the cheapest, cell phone plan running there. And yet she's willing to do all this in the service of a lie. It doesn't matter what she's lying about. It's not, again, it's not like she's doing this in order to, feed her family or keep a job or whatever. It's in order to have, not even in order to have a smartphone. That she needs because that's how her family communicates or whatever. It's in order to not follow the rules, to have a somewhat locked down smartphone. And again, if the amount of energy in the lie, if she couldn't do that lie, then things would look a lot different. So the concept of the erach keeping you from walking down a road because you need to be able to lie for whatever reason to do it is it's very real. Again, like I said, it's not a new thing, but it's really important because in terms of technology, for instance, getting internet access, getting smart devices, etc., it's very, very easy to do, but it most of the time requires being dishonest with people, who have standing to ask, whether it's your teachers, your school, your parents, or whatever. So there are two ways in which ehrlichkeit, even though it's not, intuitive to start with, there are two different ways in which ehrlichkeit really protects you from getting yourself into trouble. And I'll tell you, in general, to me, whenever it's, conversations about all sorts of things come up, and one of the things that I always say when I'm like trying to evaluate a new idea, a theory, or whatever, is, are the people who are espousing, propounding this idea being honest? Now, if they're being honest, it doesn't mean they're right, but I am willing to listen. I'm willing to hear it out. 9 times out of 10, people who are saying things that are not Torah also say things that are not true. So to me, it's like, if they're saying things that are not true, that is a huge red flag that there's a problem. There's either they're not Torah or they're bad news in other ways. So again, that ehrlichkeit, both for myself and in how I evaluate a proposal, an idea, the person who I'm dealing with, that is a key thing that helps keep people from getting into trouble. Next piece is humility. And again, it's not automatic and obvious, but humility again is really important. And it's interesting, again, in two areas. So first of all, the ability just to say, okay, I goofed. It's a very common problem that, say, a kid stumbles into a problem. Okay, they did something they shouldn't. They made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't even on purpose, right? They weren't going behind their parents' back, whatever. But they're afraid to admit. They're afraid to go to their parents to say, Ma, I saw this thing that's like, I don't know what it's about. I need help. Okay, they're afraid to look stupid. They're afraid their parents going to yell at them, whatever. And so the parents going to yell at them is a different set of issues. But the ability to say, I made a mistake. Can you help me? So I made a mistake, and can you help me? It's really, really important to be able to reach out for help. But it's very hard to reach out for help if you can't admit that you made a mistake. If you're steht nicht done, or some people just like, I can never be wrong. I'm always right. And nobody's always right. Nobody is always right. So you have to have the humility to be able to admit that I was wrong. The humility to know that maybe I don't have the answers here. Maybe I need some help. Maybe I was wrong. Somebody comes to me with this wonderful proposal. Am I really the person who knows whether this is, makes sense? Maybe I should talk to somebody who knows more about finance. Maybe I should talk to a Rav. Being able to ask a Rav a shaila is huge, because there are a lot of people out there who talk in the name of Yiddishkeit, who say, halacha says this and halacha says that, or Yiddishkeit says the other thing, the fourth of it. And what? So many of them, they look, they look from, they sound from, they know the lingo, but but they're not. Whatever they may look like, they're not. But the ability to say, this doesn't, I'm not sure if this sounds right. This is something new. So I don't know if it sounds right or wrong, but this is totally new to me. Let me reach out for help. It's really, really crucial. The ability to do that. And like I said, just the ability, if you have messed up, if you have made a mistake, look, it happens to everybody. There's only one There's only one Eibishter. That's the only not infallible in the world. The rest of us, we all make mistakes. And we have to be willing to recognize that we make mistakes, that we don't know everything, etc. And that gives us a fallback, when we make a mistake, when we thought we make a mistake, and like also proactively where we can go forward and reach out for help before we fall in. And the last thing is critical thinking. And critical thinking in and of itself can get you in trouble if you think again that you know all the answers, or that you're the one who knows always when somebody's hacking a China, whatever. So if you're good at critical thinking, part of what that should help you do is figure out when you need to ask a question. Okay. But you need to be able to stop and say, does this make sense? Is this consonant with what I know? Is this consonant with the things that I've always been taught? Is it internally consistent, right? I mentioned the 409 scams. I mean, one of the very obvious questions is, like, if you don't have access to all that money, how are you dumping it into my bank account? Why is having my bank account information going to help you? And the answer is that it doesn't. The reason they want your bank account information is actually so that they can access your bank account and empty it out. Okay. So, that's just like at a high level. But again, so often, people say things. A few years ago, I don't know who it was, created a Kickstarter, like, one of these projects for a whole new class of, basically they were claiming to have created or be developing a smartphone that could be used on Shabbos. Now, anybody who stops to think about this and who understands anything about the technology and has some basic understanding of halacha knows that this is not possible. Now, is it theoretically possible that there might be some development in technology that might make it possible? I doubt it. But, I'm not going to say it is whatever. But given today's technology, and this was 5 years ago, which, whatever, technology has advanced. But given today's technology, it is impossible, right? But these people, they had a whole thing about the halacha and, full of rishonim and achronim and this and that and the other. But you know what? Somebody who's thinking straight, right, is going to look at this and say, what does this have to do with that? You're quoting a Rashi about something that is not relevant to how smartphones work. About ksiva, and yes, that conversation. Yes, the conversation about ksiva comes up when you're dealing with the screen of a smartphone, but that's only like one piece of it. And the thing that you're quoting about ksiva has nothing to do with the conversations about ksiva on a smartphone, et cetera, et cetera. And I can go through like the whole thing, and there were also a lot of other things that if you were paying attention, like were real red flags. Now, in this case, it's just so extreme that I don't think it really ever would have gone anywhere. But again, the first thing that, but what made this finally implode was a few people, it's 2 or 3 people who basically responded and started just taking this person, actually I believe it was 2 people, taking them apart, some of their technical claims, their halachic claims, noticing discrepancies in what they said about themselves and the financing of the project. They just like kind of examined all of the aspects of this thing. And, after about 2 weeks, they just disappeared. So, the thing again is that you need to, and this crops up again, in much more subtle ways. Again, I took an extreme example just to show, but could you imagine if somebody had actually, bought in, if they had developed something that they claimed and somebody bought into this, it would have been a really big problem. To take another example, a few years ago, somebody, and this was really not a troll. Okay. The phone, I think, was what we call a troll, but this was somebody who really had, in my opinion, a really good intention, but just like didn't think it through. Some of you may remember that a number of years ago, somebody developed this app to take a picture of a mara of a bedika cloth that would go to a Rav, and the Rav would look at it and give a psak kosher, not whatever. And a lot of people were really, oh, this is so great. It's so much easier than having to run around and find the rub, this, that, and the other. And there were a lot of people like me who were just like, this is a problem. This is a really major problem. And again, when you start thinking this through, there were just a lot of questions that nobody had asked, and that nobody, a lot of people who were getting all excited hadn't really thought about. And I remember having this conversation with my daughters, and about like whether this is a good idea or not. And I was like, what about A, B, and C? And I had a bunch of questions about how this all was going to work. Turns out that one of the biggest names in Paris Mishpacha weighed in about a day and a half later, and he basically blasted the idea. Okay. And he, didn't even address most of the questions I had, but he basically did address one of the big questions I had. And he made it clear that beyond the questions I had, there were even bigger problems in that area. My point being not how brilliant I am, but the ability to step back, from the hype. And again, this wasn't even a situation where somebody was trying to do harm. She meant well. She really was you could see she was very upset when the whole thing, blew up, whatever. And you could see like in the shutdown, there was like a fair amount of resentment because she really had been trying to do something, make life easier for women. But it was just so, it was just so interesting for me to watch how many people just like jumped on the bandwagon without thinking through the many different kinds of issues that could potentially be a problem. I wouldn't have gotten up and said, I am answering it. I'm not big enough to do that. But what I said to my daughters was, these are really big problems. And I think that these are big enough problems that until you get some answers, I wouldn't trust this. Like I said, then before anybody had a chance to go, this Rabbi Farkash, for those who are wondering, weighed in, basically said this is just not possible. This is not a possible thing to do in a halachically appropriate manner. And that was, the Rabbanim who had agreed to work, with this app, bowed out after, seeing what he had to say, because he wrote a lengthy essay dealing with certain of the halachic aspects. And they were like, okay, you know what? We're not arguing. This is, a person of great stature. And that was the end of it. So the point here is that I am not a major halachic expert, but the fact that I kind of was able to take a step back, in this case, again, no harm done, because again, it blew up of its own weight. But the point is that being able to take a step back and say, okay, I really need to talk to Urav, or if it's not a halachic issue, a doctor, a lawyer, a financial planner, or maybe just, my uncle who happens to be a financial planner or whatever, kind of thing, somebody who knows more than I do, because something doesn't sound right. And this is why I think it doesn't sound right, is very, very, is very useful. And again, the link here is with humility, because if you think, oh, I can tell when everything is right or wrong. So you can have all the critical thinking in the world, and you're going to be critical about the wrong things. You're going to miss things that are important, or you're going to start, figure out that something may be off, and then not have necessarily the tools, the knowledge to get a correct answer. And sometimes your critical thinking will lead you to pick up on a real problem. Sometimes you're right that it looks odd, but then you talk to somebody who knows that, yeah, it turns out to be right. That happens too. And, but again, it's not, and by the way, that's not as if you've wasted your time, because you will have learned something. But the point is that you need to have the humility and the critical thinking, and together that creates a very, very powerful set of defenses against getting taken for a ride, whether beruchnius or begashmius, whether it's somebody who is, talking a line. I mean, if you listen to the current political stuff, I mean, there are people who are saying things in the name of Yiddishkeit that are like, no, absolutely not. But it's so easy to get swept up, because, they do say some things that are true, and they actually mention some things that are halachically correct, but they take it to a point that halacha does not support. And again, the ability to step back and step away from the emotional being swept up in this, to say, okay, wait, time out, let's really think about it. And then, in some cases you'll come to a conclusion, or to say, that's interesting, I really need to talk to whatever, is a very, very powerful and important, very powerful and important tool. So that is the fundamental foundation of what you need when you're, when you're dealing with what in a sense is the jungle of technology. Do we have any questions? Okay, I see that the recording. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I will tie it up with a 1-minute recap. Basically, fundamental foundation is there is no place, there is no thing, there's no carve out from the Eibishter. There's an iron, the Eisen Shamas, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, your parents, your coworkers, your school, whatever, may not know about something, the Eibishter does. So the illusion that we can hide is just that, it is an illusion. And that's really important. It's so easy to get swept up in that illusion, and it is only an illusion. So that's the first thing we need to always remember, that as powerful as a technology makes us feel, and as hidden as it lets us feel, there's a limit to that, and that limit is other people, not the Eibishter. If you keep that in mind, then you are also kept safe from people. But that's, so that's step one. The second issue is ehrlichkeit. It keeps you safe on 2 counts. One is that so many of the problems, so many of the misbehaviors that we see and hear require dishonesty to enable them, whether it's sneaking behind, somebody's back, taking work time that you owe to your employer if you're on the clock, etc. And again, if anybody isn't familiar with the story of Rish Lakish, it's a good story, but it really illustrates the point. On the other side, also, simply when dealing with stuff, with suggestions, with technologies, etc., with the people you deal with, if you make ehrlichkeit a touchstone and a first cut filter for anything that you look at, that you talk to, that you entertain, you will cut out of your environment a huge amount of problematic stuff. Because again, people who are trying to push an agenda that is not teredic, that is not ehrlich, people who are trying to pull you into all sorts of inappropriate things, are going to be their dishonesty enables them to chop you in. And if your nose is sharp for dishonesty, that will help protect you from those people. And lastly is that pairing of humility and critical thinking. You need to be able to recognize when you've made a mistake. You need to recognize that you don't always have the right answers. You need to be able to admit your mistake and reach out for help. But you also need to know enough and think enough about what you're seeing, about what you're hearing, to recognize when something doesn't sound right. Just enough, even sometimes it's enough to come to a conclusion, but sometimes all you need is enough to ask a question. Because again, if you're used to asking questions, now you know there's a question, you can go and ask that question. You don't have to have all the answers yourself. You just need to be able to recognize that there is a problem or a potential problem. And that, I think, pretty much summarizes, the last 40 minutes of what I've been discussing. Last call for questions or comments. Okay, so if you will give me a moment, I will drop into the site the information for next week's meeting. Hold on one second. I am, okay, let me, okay, actually it's going to be the same, it's the same address, so that's not a problem. I just wanted to double check that. So next week, same time, 8:30, we will go on to the next piece of what it is you need to be looking at in terms of the, I started with, you know, not personality characteristics, and the next thing is areas of halacha and hashkafa that I think are extremely important, because those are the places where you tend to run into trouble if you don't start, if you don't start from the get-go. And have a good night, everyone. There is a recording on YouTube, so it will be up and live in about 3 minutes. Have a good night.